Just 3 weeks ago, my mother, Helena Sterling, was still vibrant. I remember her standing in her Seattle studio, a splash of clay staining her favorite smock, her laughter echoing like wind chimes when my son, Leo, tried to help her with a sculpture. She was life personified. Then, one gray Tuesday morning, the call came from the Seattle General Hospital. They said she was gone. A sudden, merciless cardiac arrest had snatched her away. The funeral took place under a typical Washington drizzle, a mournful, misty rain that seemed to reflect the heaviness in my chest. And my father, Arthur Sterling, the tech mogul who built his empire, Sterling Ventures, on ruthlessness and ambition, was conspicuously absent. As I stood there in the wind-swept cemetery, watching the oak casket, draped in white gardenias, Helena's favorite, being lowered into the cold earth, I felt an emptiness so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. The silence was broken only by the shovelfuls of damp soil hitting the polished wood. My father, the man who had shared 30 years of life with her, who had benefited from her grace and stability, was nowhere in sight. While I was fulfilling the bitter duty of a grieving son, Arthur was in the Caribbean, hand in hand with his much younger mistress, Jade. I had seen the evidence moments earlier on my phone, a glossy, sickening photograph posted publicly to his social feed. Arthur, smiling widely in a linen suit, a cocktail in his hand, with Jade pressed close. The caption was a final, callous stab to my soul, a new chapter, finally living true to myself. He didn't just skip his wife's funeral, he publicly celebrated his freedom hours after her burial. The sheer audacity, the cold-blooded lack of respect, twisted the sorrow into a searing, white-hot rage. I stood silently before the newly covered grave, the rain washing the mud from my shoes, attempting to convince myself that this nightmare was over, that the pain would eventually fade into memory. I told myself I would heal, that I would move past the toxic shadow Arthur had cast over our lives. But the nightmare had only just begun. That same night, I couldn't sleep. The upscale wooden glass home my wife, Sophia, and I shared on the outskirts of Seattle felt suffocatingly silent. I was downstairs in the dark, clutching the daisy-embroidered handkerchief, one of the few personal items returned from the hospital, when my phone buzzed. The harsh sound cutting through the quiet like a gunshot. I glanced at the screen. My heart stopped. The message was brief, cold, and entirely unmistakable. It came from my mother's old, encrypted number, the one I had just been forced to cancel. "I am not dead. Meet me at the grave now." I froze, the blood draining from my face. Was this a sick joke? Some kind of system error? My mother was gone. I had buried her just hours ago. But the message felt terrifyingly real. My hands trembled as I stared at the text, the words burning into my mind. Every logical part of me, the precise, rational mind of a financial risk analyst, screamed delusion. Yet, a deeper, primal instinct, fueled by the rage from Arthur's betrayal, urged me forward, without another thought, fueled only by frantic, desperate hope. I grabbed my coat and a flashlight. I didn't dare wake Sophia. I raced out into the persistent Seattle rain, my heart pounding a rhythm of fear and disbelief. I had to know. I had to see the truth, no matter how impossible, no matter how dangerous. I drove toward the cemetery, toward the freshly turned earth, toward the possibility that the darkness I thought I knew was nothing compared to the truth I was about to uncover. My name is Devin Sterling. At 33, I should have been focused on my career, on the complex algorithms and market anomalies that defined my role as a financial risk analyst at a major Seattle tech firm. From the outside, my life was a textbook image of West Coast success. I was driven, meticulous, and lived in a modern, glass-walled house nestled among the evergreen trees, a stark contrast to the old money opulence of the Sterling family mansion. I had a stable, loving marriage with Sophia, a gifted psychologist whose calm, reasoned nature anchored me during market volatility and family crises alike. We had Leo, our 5-year-old son, a boy with his grandmother Helena's sparkling eyes and my own analytical curiosity. Our mornings were a routine of espresso, the gentle hum of traffic, and Leo's endless stream of questions about how the world worked. I truly believed I was fortunate, but no picture, no matter how carefully composed, is ever truly flawless. There were always shadows, and mine began with my father, Arthur Sterling. Arthur, at 65, wasn't just wealthy. He was a titan in the venture capital and tech world of Seattle. His company, Sterling Ventures, funded the next generation of digital disruptors, and his name was synonymous with ruthless, calculated success. He was polished, always clad in custom-tailored suits, his voice measured and sharp, every word a strategic investment. To the public, he was an icon of vision and power. To me, he was a fortress of granite, cold, unapproachable, and perpetually disappointed. His disappointment stemmed from my refusal to join Sterling Ventures. He had groomed me since childhood to take over, to be a continuation of his power, but I couldn't stomach the corporate brutality, the constant hunger for acquisition and control. I chose to be an analyst, dealing with objective data and calculated risks, not the moral ambiguity of my father's empire. Risk analysis, he'd once scoffed, his eyes scanning my first major project presentation. You choose to merely observe the market's heart rate when you could be the one controlling its pulse. You are choosing competence over dominance. Devon, a Sterling always aims for dominance. Those words, delivered with chilling calm, always cut deep. To Arthur, I was merely an employee working for someone else, a skilled technician who lacked the necessary killer instinct to be a true heir. I didn't want to live in his shadow, nor did I want to become another version of Arthur Sterling. My mother, Helena, was the polar opposite, the light that counterbalanced Arthur's darkness. She was 62, a renowned sculptor, and, in her later years, a dedicated social activist, channeling her passion into art that spoke of social justice and human resilience. Our weekends were my sanctuary. Sophia and I would bring Leo to the mansion, not for Arthur, who was usually busy, but for Helena. She would take Leo to her airy studio, teaching him to find structure and meaning in the simplest forms, just as she had taught me. "You are my masterpiece, Devon," she would tell me, her hands, always stained with clay and paint, holding mine firmly. "Do not let your father's definition of success define your worth. You chose the path of integrity, and that is where true power lies." Helena was always the bridge, the quiet diplomat trying to ease the tension between father and son. She was my advocate, the one who reminded me that my worth was intrinsic, not contingent upon Arthur's approval. Without her, the precarious balance of my life between my happy little family and the oppressive weight of my origin would have shattered long ago. I tried hard to ignore Arthur, focusing instead on the warmth of my own life. But I knew that peace was fragile, resting upon a pane of glass that Arthur Sterling could crack at any moment. The precarious peace I maintained shattered about 6 months before my mother's passing. It wasn't just a harsh word. It was a cold, deliberate maneuver by Arthur to reinforce my failure. I was leading a highly ambitious, sustainability-focused urban renewal project for my firm, a project that, if successful, would have cemented my reputation, independent of the Sterling name. Arthur, through a shell corporation of Sterling Ventures, owned a small but strategically vital land parcel needed for the second phase. I approached him, hoping the professional distance would keep our personal animosity at bay. "The numbers are favorable. Dad, it's a high-impact project. We just need to finalize the transfer on the north lot." He leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "The north lot? Yes, prime real estate. Your project is noble, Devon, but noble doesn't pay for itself. You are asking for my capital, but you have nothing to offer but good intentions." Then he dropped the bomb he had secretly sold the lot at an inflated price to a rival developer just 3 days prior. "It's not personal, Devon," he stated, his eyes cold and devoid of remorse. "It's business. You hesitated. I executed. That is the difference between a technician and a magnate." The deal collapsed. The embarrassment, the financial loss, and the damage to my standing were immense. Arthur's action was a cruel, calculated effort to prove that without his empire, I was nothing. He didn't just want me to join him, he wanted me broken. Helena, seeing my despair, held me tight and whispered, "He tried to break your work, but he cannot break your spirit, Devon." Her words were a shield. But the incident left deep fissures in my relationship with my father. I no longer saw him as merely a cold patriarch, but as a genuine threat. The call from the Seattle General Hospital nurse felt like a delayed consequence of that fracture. The initial shock gave way to a desolate numbness as I drove through the pouring rain, Sophia's tearful face blurring the rearview mirror. How could Helena, my vibrant mother, who sculpts and tends her garden, simply vanish from a sudden heart attack? I found Arthur at the hospital, not grieving, but standing in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, speaking to a bewildered doctor. He was too composed, too focused on the logistics. "Devon, you're here," Arthur stated, his tone flat, as if I were late for a board meeting. The doctor confirmed it was a catastrophic stroke. Instantaneous. No suffering. I stared at him, my own voice trembling. "She was healthy, Dad. We were talking about her next exhibition just last week. Did you even see her this morning?" Arthur cut me off with the familiar icy command. "That is enough. Eleanor is gone. We must handle the paperwork efficiently and, most importantly, maintain the sterling dignity." He emphasized the word dignity with such sterile priority that it felt like he was signing off on a corporate merger, not acknowledging the death of his wife. There was no tremor of grief, no crack in his composure. It was a stone wall. He was more concerned with the facade than the reality of his loss, a loss I suspected he was secretly celebrating. I left the hospital feeling not just bereaved, but deeply unsettled. My analyst's mind flagged the anomalies, the lack of warning signs. Arthur's immediate composure, his focus on dignity. Something was wrong. 3 days later, the funeral was a blur of weeping relatives and former colleagues of Helena. Arthur, of course, was absent. He had sent a curt text tied up with estate lawyers. "Handle it." His absence fueled the whispers that I tried desperately to silence for Sophia and for Leo, but the pretense evaporated the moment I saw the photo. It was an hour after Helena's burial. Sophia and I had just returned to the silent house. Needing distraction, I checked Arthur's public social feed. There he was, in Hawaii, arm around Jade, his new mistress, a woman who worked in his own venture capital firm. They were laughing, their wine glasses catching the sunset. The caption, "A new chapter, finally living true to myself." The image didn't just hurt, it detonated the suspicion I'd been fighting. Arthur hadn't skipped the funeral for estate lawyers. He was flaunting his liberation. In that moment, staring at the smiling face of the man who was supposed to be mourning his wife, my grief turned into cold, calculated resolve. My mother's death was not random. I had no proof, but every logical indicator, every emotional anomaly, screamed that Arthur Sterling was hiding a dark truth. I would find it. The image of Arthur's smug smile in the Caribbean burned away my grief, leaving only a cold, focused resolve. That night, after Sophia and Leo were asleep, I sat in the darkened living room, the city lights reflecting faintly off the windows. I stared at Helena's embroidered handkerchief, feeling the weight of her entire life, her warmth, her kindness, her quiet strength contained within that small square of fabric. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand why this man, my father, treated her as disposable. It was then the phone buzzed. That sharp, cold sound was instantly arresting. The text was still there, glowing with an impossible truth. I am not dead. Meet me at the grave now. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a ghost story. It was a desperate plea. I tried calling the number back, the analyst in me seeking confirmation, but the line cut off abruptly, only silence responding. The impulse was too strong to resist. I grabbed my car keys, threw on my raincoat, and sped out of the house. I drove through the night toward the cemetery on the outskirts of Seattle, the only thought guiding me being, if this is a lie, I will confront the one who sent it. If this is the truth, I will save her. The cemetery was a silent, sprawling landscape of stone and shadow, lit only by the weak, flickering glow of the distant streetlights. The air was damp and heavy. I parked the car and approached the freshly turned soil of Helena's grave. And there she was. A frail figure stood barely visible in the mist, right in front of the mound of earth that should have contained her body. I aimed my flashlight, and the beam illuminated her face. It was my mother, Helena Sterling, thinner, her eyes etched with fear and exhaustion, but undeniably alive. I stood rooted, unable to reconcile the woman before me with the burial I had witnessed just hours earlier. This could not be real. I had seen the casket. "Devin," she whispered, her voice a fragile breath. Then, the stoic resolve that had carried her through the past days broke, and she began to sob, her small shoulders shaking uncontrollably. I rushed forward, my own tears finally falling, hot and uncontrolled. The warmth of her embrace, the faint, familiar scent of lavender and clay that always clung to her, was overwhelming. I held her tight, terrified that if I loosened my grip, she would dissolve like the mist. "Mom," I choked out, unable to form a coherent question. How are you here?" She pulled back, her cold fingers gripping my raincoat. She looked into my eyes, and the fear in her gaze was replaced by a fierce determination. "You cannot tell anyone. Devin, I mean anyone." She glanced nervously at the surrounding darkness. "I had a reason to fake my death. I will explain everything, but it is not safe here." We quickly moved away from the grave and the open road, following a narrow, overgrown maintenance path. She led me to an old, inconspicuous silver sedan parked far from the main entrance, a car that was certainly not Arthur's luxury fleet. She drove us through the winding side streets to a small, isolated cabin, tucked away in the woods outside the city perimeter. The interior was sparse, a temporary safe house. We sat down, and she began her terrifying confession. "It started 6 months ago," she began, her voice steadying as she organized the painful memories. "Around the time Arthur ruined your urban renewal project." My logical mind instantly connected the two timelines. Arthur's professional cruelty against me coincided with his personal tyranny against her. "He changed. Devin. He became obsessed with absolute control. He started demanding I sign over everything in my name, all my inherited property, all my shares in Sterling Ventures, my parents' legacy." Her voice trembled as she spoke the name Arthur. "When I refused, he didn't just get angry, he grew violent. He installed hidden cameras in the bedroom and study. I realized I was living in a beautiful, gilded prison." She described the constant emotional abuse, the threats that escalated from financial ruin to outright physical disappearance. The breaking point came one night when Arthur shoved her against a wall, his eyes cold and empty. "He screamed that I would regret defying him," she whispered. "That's when I knew he was not just a ruthless businessman. He was a dangerous sociopath. I knew if I stayed, he would eventually silence me permanently and legally claim my assets. I had only one chance to escape him and expose him. He needed to believe I was no longer a threat." She told me about Martha, the nurse, an old college friend working at Seattle General Hospital, who had agreed to risk her career. The plan was meticulous, like a dark performance art piece. Helena would stage a sudden collapse. Martha would switch out her body with a mannequin or a similar, undignified substitute before the autopsy was ordered. The pre-signed death certificate, the quick paperwork Arthur demanded, all played into the conspiracy of her escape. "I trusted you, Devon," she finished, tears welling up again. "I knew you were the only one who wouldn't just mourn me, but would also question Arthur's composure. I knew you would not abandon the truth." The room spun. My father, the man I resented, was not just a selfish cheat, he was an abuser, a surveillance tyrant, and a potentially murderous criminal. My analyst's instinct had been right. The anomaly was the core truth: Helena's death was a lie designed to save her life. Now, the roles were reversed. Arthur was the unsuspecting puppet, celebrating his freedom, while we, the presumed victims, held the strings of a dangerous counterplan. "Mom," I said, my voice heavy with a grim new purpose. "He's overconfident. We have to make him pay. We need evidence, something that doesn't just put him behind bars for abuse, but dismantles his entire empire." I knew I couldn't act on blind fury. Arthur Sterling was too smart, too shielded by wealth and power. My training as a financial risk analyst kicked in, overriding the emotional turmoil. We needed undeniable, irrefutable evidence, a blueprint of his betrayal, not just a personal accusation. The first step was to secure a lifeline. I reached out to an old contact of Helena's, Detective Miller, a retired Seattle PD investigator specializing in white-collar crime. Miller, a stoic man with a sharp, silver gaze, had immense respect for Helena's social work. He provided me with a secure, encrypted satellite phone for communicating with Helena, and more importantly, a plan of action. "You need to exploit his arrogance. Devon," Miller advised. "He thinks your mother is dead, meaning he thinks the threat is neutralized. He won't have moved the most sensitive files yet." The target was Arthur's private study, located in the opulent Sterling mansion, the house that had become Helena's gilded cage. The night I chose was strategic, a Tuesday, when Arthur was known to be on his yacht near the San Juans with Jade. Under the cover of heavy rain, I drove to the house, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I still had the old service key, a relic of my non-existent heir status. Stepping inside felt like walking into a crime scene that had been meticulously sanitized. The air was heavy with the absence of Helena's gentle presence. I moved quickly to Arthur's second-floor study. It was protected by an electronic lock, but I remembered the code instantly: Helena's birthday. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. The key to his secrets was his own wife's existence, a reality he had erased. The room was vast, dominated by a heavy mahogany desk. I ignored the filing cabinets filled with mundane business contracts and focused on where Arthur, the master manipulator, would hide his true leverage. My analyst mind told me to look for anomalies in the physical structure. After a tense 20 minutes, my fingers found a slight looseness in the oak paneling behind the desk, right next to a built-in bookshelf. A tap confirmed a hollow space. Using a fine letter opener, I pried the panel free. Behind it was an antique safe, secured by a dial combination lock. I tried common dates: Arthur's birthday, my birthday, even the firm's founding date, all failed. Then, a memory surfaced: a bitter argument years ago about Arthur being forced to attend an anniversary dinner. I dialed in the Sterling wedding anniversary. Click. The heavy door swung open. Inside, the truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The safe wasn't a vault for stock certificates. It was a treasure trove of dark secrets, financial deception bank statements detailing massive, undocumented transfers totaling over $30 million to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein. This was irrefutable evidence of money laundering and severe tax evasion. Legal fraud. A stack of forged legal contracts bearing Helena's digitally manipulated signature. transferring key assets and a significant stake in Sterling Ventures over to Arthur's personal holding company. He didn't just want her gone, he wanted her legally stripped before her death. The grand conspiracy. What chilled me most was an old USB drive, a stack of brittle, decades-old Seattle newspapers, and a worn cassette tape. My hands shook as I plugged the USB drive into my secure laptop. An audio file titled Charles_Confrontation, MP3 appeared. I pressed play, and the low-quality recording filled the silent study. It was Arthur's voice, harsh and venomous, locked in an argument dating back over 20 years with Charles, Helena's father, my maternal grandfather. "You think you can control me forever?" "Charles," Arthur's voice snarled. "That fortune belongs to me, not your naive daughter, you know that." Charles's voice, calm but firm. "Leonard, you won't touch a cent unless Helena agrees. You know I secured her legacy." The argument escalated into a flurry of dark threats from Arthur before the recording abruptly cut off. I looked at the stack of newspapers. They detailed the fatal car accident that had killed Charles and his wife Helena's parents during a sudden business trip 20 years ago. At the time, it was deemed a tragic, random accident. Now, coupled with Arthur's resentful tone and his clear obsession with Helena's inheritance, the possibility became a terrifying certainty. Arthur Sterling hadn't just pushed his wife to fake her death. He may have orchestrated a crime that had been masked as a tragedy for 2 decades. The man I called father was a cold-blooded killer and a master criminal. I swiftly photographed and backed up every piece of data, the financial records, the forged documents, the recording, and the newspaper clippings onto multiple encrypted drives. This wasn't just evidence of betrayal. It was the entire foundation needed to dismantle Arthur's empire and send him to prison for life. My grief was now replaced by a cold, sharpened determination. I had the blueprint. The grim truth I carried back to the safe house was a heavy shield against fear. I presented the USB drive and the newspaper clippings to Helena and Detective Miller. Helena sat silent, her hands clasped. The decades of suppressed suspicion about her parents' death finally confirmed by Arthur's own digital footprint. "Arthur's arrogance is our greatest asset," Miller stated, reviewing the bank statements. He was so certain of his control that he kept everything: the financial fraud, the forged signatures, and the 20-year-old audio threat. "We can't go to the police yet. We need a coordinated legal strike." Our next crucial ally was Charlotte Wells, Helena's college friend and a highly specialized estate lawyer. I met her at a neutral coffee shop outside the main financial district. Charlotte, a woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Listened to the story, the fake death, the threats, the murder suspicion with the unnerving calm of someone who had seen it all. "This is not just a messy divorce, Devon," Charlotte declared, studying the evidence. "This is a blueprint for a major corporate fraud investigation. Arthur is running a sophisticated shell network. We need a direct link from these offshore accounts to a current operation, and we need to move fast before he realizes the safe is compromised." My role as a financial risk analyst became critical. I spent days meticulously analyzing the digital records, identifying a pattern of wire transfers that consistently routed through a holding company in the Cayman Islands, before flowing back into a seemingly legitimate real estate development under Sterling Ventures. This was the financial anomaly I was trained to find: the digital paper trail, connecting Arthur's illegal money to his public success. Miller, meanwhile, provided essential intelligence and counter-surveillance advice, warning me to watch out for any of Arthur's corporate spies. "The moment you start digging near Sterling Ventures, he'll smell you," he cautioned. The biggest risk was yet to come. I needed data from Arthur's current active servers at Sterling Ventures headquarters downtown. One Tuesday evening, knowing Arthur was away, I used my old access card, a forgotten perk from a Christmas long ago, to enter the sterile, silent headquarters. The adrenaline was a cold rush in my veins. I bypassed Frank, the friendly security guard, with a rehearsed excuse about retrieving old project files. I made my way to Arthur's executive office on the top floor. The key to the final data was not brute force, but psychology. I accessed his main computer using a backup password I'd memorized. Then, I found the final encrypted folder. I tried generic passwords, failed, and then, remembering Arthur's smug social media posts and his current obsession, I typed the name of his mistress, Jade. The folder unlocked instantly. Inside was a treasure trove of current, active data, detailed logs of money flowing through various venture capital funds that were nothing more than laundered money pipelines. This was the current, undeniable evidence Charlotte needed to trigger a federal investigation. I copied everything, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the USB drive, and slipped out of the building unnoticed. Back home, the constant strain began to fracture my facade. My wife, Sophia, a psychologist, was acutely attuned to my mental state. She noticed the late-night departures, the haunted look in my eyes, the sudden, extreme secrecy. One night, she found me sitting alone, staring into the dark. "Devin," she said softly, sitting beside me, "I am worried. You look like you're fighting a war you can't talk about. I know you're grieving, but this secrecy, it's going to break you. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone." The guilt was crushing. I wanted nothing more than to tell her, to lean on my anchor. I could see the truth in her eyes. She knew I was lying. Not about my loyalty to her, but about the state of our world. "It's about Arthur," I admitted, choosing my words carefully, revealing only the tip of the iceberg. "It's worse than you can imagine. I found evidence that he destroyed Mom's legacy and is running illegal operations. I have to see this through. Sophia, if I tell you the details, it puts you and Leo in danger. Please, trust my silence just a little longer." Her face softened with fear and resolve. "I trust you, Devin, but if that man is truly dangerous, you must think like an analyst, not a hero. Be smart." Her warning anchored me just as Charlotte prepared the final legal package. She filed an anonymous, comprehensive complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Internal Revenue Service, initiating a preliminary asset freeze targeting Arthur's offshore shell corporations. "The clock is ticking. Arthur," Charlotte later told me over the secure line, "the SEC and the IRS move slowly, but when they move, they bring the full weight of the federal government. He won't know the bomb has been planted until the warrants arrive." Meanwhile, I used a burner phone and Miller's advice to anonymously leak cryptic hints on financial forums, vague questions about the sudden liquidity of Sterling Ventures and the questionable origins of Arthur's funds. The seed of doubt was planted in the financial community. Arthur Sterling, consumed by his newfound freedom and celebration with Jade, was oblivious. The trap was set. The legal storm we had carefully orchestrated finally broke. One morning, the headlines screamed the news: Sterling Ventures under federal investigation for fraud and tax evasion. Arthur Sterling's name, once synonymous with visionary tech funding, was now a byword for financial crime. His offshore accounts were frozen. His major partners dissolved their contracts, and the firm's stock plummeted into freefall. The empire he had built on ruthless ambition was crumbling in the glare of public scrutiny. Arthur, who had been vacationing in the Bahamas, was immediately recalled to Seattle. The smug smile I'd seen in his social media posts had vanished, replaced by a desperate, strained mask of panic. He tried to contact his usual high-powered legal defense team, but the federal charges and the mounting evidence of money laundering thanks to Charlotte's preemptive strike had made him radioactive. That afternoon, my phone rang. His name flashed on the screen, a terrifying familiar sight. I answered, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through me. "Dad, Devin." His voice was hoarse, ragged, lacking the cold, measured calm I'd always known. "Have you seen this? It's lies. All fabricated by jealous competitors. They are trying to ruin me. You have to help me. You know the systems, the codes. You have to speak out." I listened to his frantic pleading, searching for a single trace of remorse for Helena, for his actions against me. But there was only the raw fear of a powerful man losing his grip. He was only concerned with his survival. "I'm not sure what I can do for you, Dad," I replied calmly. "But if you want to talk face to face, we can meet tonight, at the mansion, 8 o'clock. He agreed instantly, thick suspicion clouding his tone. "Fine. 8. Don't disappoint me. Devin." I hung up and texted Helena. "Tonight, the mansion. Are you ready for the final act?" Her reply was immediate and firm. "I am ready, my son. Be careful. He won't surrender easily." At 8 o'clock, I stood in the foyer of the Sterling mansion, the house that had been both my childhood home and Helena's gilded prison. Arthur was already there, slumped in the expansive living room, his tailored suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless, panic-stricken flights. He looked small, defeated, the magnate reduced to a cornered animal. "You're late," he muttered, reaching for an unopened bottle of expensive scotch. "Let's talk about the company," I said, ignoring his petty complaint. "But first, don't you have anything to say about Mom, about what you did to her?" Arthur scoffed, a weariness flickering in his hollow eyes. "Your mother is dead. Devin, you know that. Don't bring up the past to stir up guilt." I took a slow, deep breath, delivering the lines we had rehearsed. "Are you sure she's dead, Dad?" I walked to the ornate double doors leading to the dining room and opened them fully. Helena Sterling stepped into the room. She was frail, but stood resolute, her posture a masterpiece of enduring strength. She fixed her gaze directly on Arthur. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The color drained from Arthur's face. The bottle of scotch slipped from his grasp and shattered on the marble floor. He staggered back, clutching the arm of the sofa, his mouth agape. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice a disbelieving tremor. "No. It's impossible. You're dead. I buried you." Helena advanced, her voice clear and cutting cold. "Did you think you could erase me so easily? Arthur, did you think you could steal my parents' legacy? Sign my death warrant and walk away clean?" His panic snapped into feral rage. "This is a setup. You two are conspiring to frame me." I stepped beside Helena, my voice steady with the weight of truth. "We know everything. Arthur, the offshore accounts, the forged contracts, the death threats, and the 20-year-old accident that killed your in-laws. Charles and his wife. The recording doesn't lie." I played the audio clip of his voice, harsh and greedy, threatening my grandfather. As Arthur listened, his face contorted into pure, desperate defeat. Just then, the wail of sirens sliced through the night. The front door burst open, and federal agents flooded the foyer. An FBI officer stepped into the living room, holding up an arrest warrant. "Arthur Sterling, you are under arrest for money laundering, investment fraud, and accessory to murder." Arthur looked at Helena, his eyes burning with a final, desperate hatred. He didn't look at me. He had lost. He was handcuffed right there, in the center of the shattered glass and the crumbling remnants of his empire. As the agents led him out past the flashing cameras of the waiting press, the tech mogul was reduced to a common criminal. The arrest of Arthur Sterling was not the end, but the climactic turning point. The case quickly became a national media sensation, dubbed the Sterling Shadow Scandal. Arthur, the tech mogul, was relentlessly exposed as a criminal mastermind who had leveraged his empire for fraud and whose greed stemmed from a decades-old crime, the suspected murder of his in-laws. At the trial, Helena and I stood as key witnesses. When Helena took the stand, her frailty was gone, replaced by the profound, quiet strength of a survivor. She recounted the abuse, the fear, and the sheer calculation required to stage her own death. "I did not do this for revenge," she testified, looking straight at the defense table where Arthur sat, gaunt and defeated. "I did it for justice for my parents and to protect my son from the darkness that consumed his father. Arthur Sterling was convicted on all major counts: money laundering, fraud, and accessory to murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. The judgment felt less like vengeance and more like a final, decisive alignment of the moral universe. With the empire dismantled, the true work began: the rebuilding of our lives. Helena, the sculptor, refused to keep any asset tainted by Arthur's greed. She sold the mansion, the symbol of her long captivity, and donated the vast majority of the proceeds to a foundation supporting women and families affected by financial coercion and domestic abuse. She then moved to a small, bright house on the quiet Washington coast, where she finally reclaimed her spirit. She resumed her art, teaching local children to find beauty in form and meaning in texture. She was no longer Eleanor, the magnate's wife, but Helena, the resilient artist. I, too, found my freedom. I resigned from my tech firm. The algorithms and risk metrics I mastered were now applied to a more meaningful pursuit. Inspired by Helena's spirit and her former role, I founded a non-profit design studio called Helena Designs. Our mission was simple: building green, sustainable community spaces that focused on healing architecture, creating environments of safety and connection. A stark contrast to the emotionally cold world Arthur had constructed. Sophia, my anchor, and Leo, my light, remained my true center. I finally told Sophia the full, incredible truth. She hugged me, relieved but shaken. "You fought a clean fight, Devon," she said. "You chose integrity over destruction." Our visits to the coast with Helena became our family's new ritual, a place of laughter, art, and the unburdened presence of a mother who had returned from the grave. I began writing this story, not to boast of our victory, but as a testament for Leo. I want him to know that life isn't defined by the height of your buildings or the size of your portfolio, but by the courage to face shadows, even if those shadows wear your family name. The most profound lesson I learned was that true strength lies not in the ability to dominate, but in the unwavering commitment to truth. Arthur, in his quest for control, lost everything. Helena, in her choice to let go and rebuild, regained everything. The story of the Sterling family is a stark reminder that beneath the polish of success, dark secrets can persist for decades. But eventually, the truth, driven by the quiet resilience of those who refuse to be erased, always finds its way into the light. The journey from grief to justice is never easy, but it is always worth the cost. It is a testament to the power of integrity and the enduring hope that even the most shattered lives can be rebuilt into something meaningful and beautiful. If this story of perseverance and finding justice resonated with you, I encourage you to share your thoughts. What part of Helena's courage or Devon's relentless pursuit spoke to you most profoundly? Leave your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and hit the notification bell to follow more true stories about the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.